Good afternoon. This is the Thursday, May 17, 2018 meeting of the Athens City Planning Commission. 4 members are present. 1 is absent. A quorum has been established. Steve, did you wish to address the, okay, just raise your right hand. And do you swear to tell the truth to the commission as best as you can?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Also would like to welcome a new member to our commission, Mr. Andy Stone. Welcome.
Thank you.
And let's see, we'll just get going here. Disposition of minutes. Any changes, additions, comments? Otherwise, I'll just make a motion to adopt the minutes.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That'd be 3 votes because you weren't here from the last one.
Oh, so I can't vote on
sorry.
it. Thank you.
So that's 3 members in favor and 2 abstentions, we'll just call it. Cases, case number 18-04. Verizon Wireless modifications at 13 East Washington Street. Hello, Mr. Rick, why don't you go ahead and...
Good afternoon. Yes, if you recall, this is just a modification of an antenna on the city garage, and we had tabled it concerning contract negotiations. And for the sake of the viewing audience, I'll go ahead and read the whole thing again since it's just a short thing.
Okay, great.
Title 43 Wireless Communications Review for 13 East Washington Street in Athens. Verizon Wireless is planning to upgrade and add equipment and a new antennas on an existing 34-foot self-supporting tower located on the top level of the city parking garage. This new request involves modifying the antenna platform on the tower. No changes to the height or the footprint of the tower will be made. Verizon is proposing to modify the platform as follows, adding 3 RRH remote radio heads. The proper supporting documents were provided for the structural analysis of wind and foundation requirements. After a review of the documents is determined and met with code requirements under Title 43. Facts, the applicant is Verizon Wireless agent Rich Hansen. Property owner is the City of Athens. Site location is 13 East Washington Street. Zoning is B2D. The estimated value of improvement is $55,000. That's it.
Let's see. Now, as far as the one point that Ms. Mosley made up in the previous meeting regarding the reference to Ohio University, that's cleared up in this?
That's been cleared up, correct.
Okay.
All right, and the other issue with that was the
contract between between Verizon and the city, and the Deputy Service Safety Director provided us with a contract that their existing contract is still in effect.
Okay.
So they're okay contractually.
right. That contract has been renewed, and it'll roll through 2022, I believe,
Correct.
at this
for
point.
3 5-year periods.
Correct. So I'd like to make a motion to remove this from the table.
Right. I'll second. Oh, you already did. Ms. Bain already did. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that's unanimous with 1 abstention. If there's not any other comment, does someone want to make a motion then to adopt the modifications?
So move.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that's 4 in favor, 1 abstention. Thank you, Mr. Suroy.
You're welcome, sir.
Let's see. Communications. Hoon Incorporated, Harold Avenue lot split. Mr. Suroy?
Yes, Hoon has submitted a application for a minor subdivision. It's on 20 Harold Drive where it's considered a lot split. I do believe that he's here to speak to it. Mr. Pearson's here to speak to that. And I do believe there are some considerations concerning the drainage on the property. And I do believe Deputy Service Director, not Deputy, but Service Director, Safety Service Director, I'll get this right also. Andy Stone will probably have some information regarding that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Pearson, first of all, did you want to come up and address the commission on anything?
Do that very basically.
Okay. And by the way, we do have, with our new bylaws, we do have an allotment of 10 minutes on communication talk as far as addressing the commission.
A total of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, first, my name's Steve Pearson. I'm here representing Cassandra Bowen, who's the owner of Hoon Incorporated. Their offices are located at 20 Harold Avenue. What they wish to do is split a piece of property off the existing parcel that they own in order to be able to transfer a portion of that and the building to a potential buyer. That closing date had been previously set, but it's been delayed now because of the proceedings here, so I'm here to try to help expedite that process. We believe, and the application that I turned in indicates that it's a minor subdivision. It's not a major subdivision. I believe the only issue that we have to address is the consideration of variance in lieu for private easement in lieu of public road frontage. That's the only thing that I can see. There's been several communications by email back and forth between the code office, myself, and Ms. Bowen. I responded to each of those inquiries or requests with amended or additional information. And so I'm basically here just to hear what we need to do to move the process along.
Okay. Mr. Suri, did you have any comments to?
Yes, one of them I had concerns and that we are dealing with easements, and under the major subdivision, that is one of the items. So I'm being basically new at this job, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Now, are you referencing this as a major?
That's what I'm asking. I'm going to ask that because under a major subdivision, one of the items, which is C, it involves division or allocation of land as a utility or drainage easement. And there is quite a history with this property concerning the drainage, which revolves around previous allocations of how this is all, the drainage is all set up, and the requirement on the deed restrictions that any concerns or any movement of property here will require that the pond remain on the property for drainage. And I just want commissioners to understand that that's a requirement, and if it's such, then I would consider that a major subdivision. So that's where I wanted to get some advice on that or some direction. If you feel comfortable with the fact that it's a minor and we are just looking at the frontage on that, then I can go with that also. But I did want to point out that we do have some issues concerning the drainage and the in relative proximity to the property, other properties, and the requirements for that pond, for that drainage area.
Mr. Stone, did you have any comment?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This particular portion of the city has had some challenges for as long as I've worked for the city, and that's as early as November of 2003, related to drainage. The retention pond that you can see in the aerial photo provided in front of you is functionally the leftover low ground from the ditch that used to be beside the railroad that was in this area. And over time, that ditch has been filled in by various owners to the extent that the fairgrounds next door experienced intermittent flooding with heavy rains. In 2004, in one of my previous capacities with the city, I embarked on a joint project with Cassandra Bowen's father, Jim, to provide an overflow for that pond that exists there, such that once it reached a certain elevation, it would overflow into the pipe and make it into the storm line on Harold Avenue. And what that did is it saved the fairgrounds from flooding when the water got up to a certain level, or when rain got to a certain level and elevated the water in that pond to a certain level. We didn't build a full storm sewer in that area at the time because, number one, it wasn't public. We were working on private property. Number two, the storm line on Harold Avenue itself was too small to receive a full-size storm line that was necessary to drain that area. In the meantime, the city undertook a project in 2009 to increase the size of the storm line on Harold Avenue. So the storm line on Harold Avenue is large enough now, should the owners of the property decide to sewer it, that pond could be filled in completely. The parcel that is proposed to be subdivision completely filled and used and increased in value. Whether or not that is a public or private improvement, or should be a public or private improvement, is something that maybe we should discuss. Another concern I have about this particular subdivision is, if I'm not mistaken, 6 parcels will be served by an access easement across private property from Harold Avenue once the subdivision goes into effect, which seems extensive to me. Furthermore, the utility access for city-owned utilities, water and sewer, currently is from Harold Avenue. If you look at the aerial photo, the building that Ms. Bowen owns, that's Hoon Construction, there on the 20 Harold, that's served directly off of Harold Avenue itself, but then there's a small garage facility kind of in the middle of your photo that's owned by Larry Young. It's served via a private utility easement that goes along the same route as the drainage easement shown on the proposed lot split. To have water and sewer service to that particular building, I'm assuming that would be the same route that the eventual owners that Ms. Bowen would sell to for these 2 new lots that she developed would follow. But then you've got multiple properties using the same easement to move their water and sewer to a public main on Harold Avenue. So, it seems to me that it's going to be quite a convoluted situation that right now, with one owner, is workable, but once you have 3 owners of this parcel, plus the owners further on back, to include Athens Visiting Nurses,
Right.
the Get Group, and Larry Young, that'll be very difficult for the city to manage the situation, and ultimately may result in a significant amount of public expense due to a private initiative.
How far does Mr. Young's, or where's his property line on the pond side?
If you look at this document noted as Exhibit B, it's a pretty small parcel right there in the middle, but it shows you here on Exhibit B, you can see right there in the middle that the building that is Mr. Young's building.
So it's just shy of really the pond itself.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And this Exhibit B is a survey that was done a number of years ago, and the existing pond is larger than, in fact, let me look here at the date. This is quite possible that this particular survey was done prior to the city working with Mr. Hoon to do that overflow project. So you can see the pond shown on this Exhibit B is much larger than what you see here on this aerial photo, because once that overflow went in, we didn't have the flooding problem on the fairgrounds when heavy rain occurred, and so it was able to be filled.
Do you consider this a major or minor subdivision?
That's a code interpretation that I'm unclear on myself. But I would support the subdivision because I do think we want to develop this area and allow Ms. Bowen to sell her property so it can develop. We're always looking for new business locations, but I think I would want to make sure that there were considerations put in place for the easement to ensure that we're not going to have a problem in the future with access for both utilities and motorists.
Exhibit B was dated October 7th, 2004. It shows the larger pond.
Nancy, did you have anything to say?
Part of it. Part of it. Well, keep filling it. And fill in this way.
Is our first, would our first priority be then to define whether it would be a major or a minor subdivision
Yes, sir.
and then go from there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And our two experts in this would probably say that at this point, they're kind of up in the air as well. Is this something that we need to
I would think
discuss
so.
with legal?
I mean, I think it's worth discussing with legal,
Okay.
as far as our interpretation on this. You know, I'm open to an argument as to why it's not. And I don't know if Mr. Pearson would want to make an argument as to why it's not.
Okay.
All right.
Mr. Pearson, would you like to come back up?
All right. I think Mr. Ciros referenced the definition of subdivision in the city's regulations, and it includes the division of land in the definition of a major subdivision when more than 5 lots are being split from an original parent parcel. In this case, that's not applicable. The total that you may be able to come up with of splits that have been done by Hoon, depending on how you count them, is 5. So the 3 that will be created, Larry Young's, and then the Get property. Mr. Hoon's incorporated original purchase from the VFW 3477, where the mini storage is and where his office used to be, was a split that the VFW did back in, I believe it was 1992 is when Mr. Hoon bought that. So even if you consider 3 parcels being created by this proposal, there would still only be a total of 5 that falls below that threshold of the definition of a major subdivision. The second part of the definition of major subdivision includes the extension of new easements for access, ingress, egress, and new easements for utilities. In this particular case, there is no proposal to create any new easement. These are all existing easements. They are each recorded in the deeds that were issued for each of the properties as splits were created. So everybody's fully aware in writing in their deed, recorded deed, of the conditions, especially for stormwater detention, that the city has required in the past. The land development ordinance for the city was created in the late 80s. It has stormwater detention as one of its criteria. When University Commons was constructed, just to the east of the property, the green areas in between the buildings are stormwater detention ponds. And so they could only discharge their water onto the VFW property at the time. It was the VFW. At no greater a rate post-development than pre-development. So when Mr. Hoon bought that original piece of property, he had a pipe that was shooting water out to him from University Commons. And that was, everything was good at that time. But of course, that was a large area there that was left that he had to try to control. And I think Andy mentioned too, it was basically just a big swamp between the old railroad bed and the fairgrounds. So Mr. Hoon not only then had to take the stormwater runoff from the VFW, because they were the original ones that had to retain their water. He then had to retain some of his own water. He had to deal with the water coming off University Commons. And all along the way, and I was at the code office at the time, each parcel as it got split had to show that it was maintaining its stormwater retention requirement at that pond. And there's no proposal right now to do anything differently than that. We're not proposing any development at this time. So if there was, then again, well, for example, land development ordinance says you have to have a stormwater detention consideration if your site is 1 acre or greater. And one of these parcels is 1 acre or greater. And so that would be considered at the time of development. But at this time, there's no, we're not proposing any development. I'm not saying that it won't occur, but for purposes of this application, all we're looking to do is divide the land, create a parcel so that the existing building can be sold. Development plans have not been solidified, if at all, for the 2 parcels that are remaining. And, you know, I understand too that it's, I'm going to kind of agree with Andy. To me, it's kind of an unusual thing to have this, I hate to say it, mosquito breeding pond, you know, right adjacent to so much development right there. I think it's something that should be dealt with. But at this time, there's no proposal, you know, to accommodate or to show any additional impact that might happen there. So,
If I can follow up on that.
Mr.
So in 2013, I, through the city, funded the design of a storm system that would allow the elimination of the pond completely, permanently, and capture stormwater from the fairgrounds, from University Commons, from all the parcels involved here, and pipe it to Harold Avenue storm system, to include some stormwater pollution prevention features for the catch basins that would go on the fairgrounds because they're around animal waste and everything else. So it's, honestly, I think it's the permanent solution to this situation. The question becomes who builds it. At the time, I provided to the various owners to include Get Group and Ms. Bowen and Mr. Young, and said if development were to occur in this area and you wanted to fill in the ponds, somebody needs to build this. The city's paid for the design. It's out there, but it needs to get built. My concern with this lot split is that there's yet another person involved once the property sells that is coming into ownership of a parcel that is that doesn't have the history in it and basically is encumbered with all of these various easements and requirements over time that have been established. I think Mr. Hoon was kind of the last man standing to begin with, and now once this parcel sells, that they're proposing and there's a pond, there's going to be a new last man standing or last person standing holding that pond with all of the restrictions that are on it. And I would want to make sure they understood that. So I don't know, while it's not really the city's problem, ultimately that's a decision or an interaction between Ms. Bowen and her buyer. But from a disclosure perspective, I hope they understand that there's a lot of complexity here. Also, another question to you, Mr. Pearson. You said 5 parcels. You know, I would contend the original parcel was the railroad parcel. And looking at Exhibit B, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Exhibit B, and there will be 7 once these two new parcels split. Now, perhaps you're contending that the frontage for the Get Group doesn't count because it is on to an alley that outs onto West 8th Street. Maybe that's what you're proposing.
right. Can I respond to both of those? First off, the number of parcels. When I started here, Mayor Hendricker used to jokingly say that Adam was the first property owner and everything was a subdivision since then. So how far back in time do you go to determine what the parent or the original parcel is? This parcel was sold by the CSX Railroad as well as many other parcels. So was that the parent parcel? My understanding of the subdivision regulations is that each new owner is permitted up to 5 splits. So how liable is a person to go back in time to account for, say, CSX splits or VFW splits? See what I'm saying? How do you count back in time to determine what that number is?
CSX had it since 1855, so, or not necessarily them, but that particular parcel was whole back to that point. So that's a fairly long time that I would say it was one whole parcel, with the splits starting in the 1980s once that railroad sold off those parcels.
Right. And to be real honest with you, there's great contention all over the state as to how to count that number up. If you'd want some legal advice on that, I suppose you have to consult the law director. But my contention would be that this doesn't meet that criteria, total number of splits.
Mr. Surratt?
Because
I'm sorry to interrupt. If we can steer back to my original question, please, and in all due respect to Mr. Pearson's experience and stuff, and his name's all over this paperwork all the way back to 2005, but I want to read what the current code reads. And it says 210307, outline of conditions for major subdivision. It reads as follows. A proposal involving any of the following shall be subject to a major subdivision procedures. A, more than 5 lots, any of which is less than 5 acres, including the original tract. B, creation, widening, or extension of a street or access easement. And then C, the one I'm pointing to, division or allocation of land as a utility or drainage easement. That's where I'm getting from. So it's any of the 3.
And the position here is that those easements already exist, and there's no
They already
new one being
exist, we're not
created.
creating any new ones.
It doesn't say creating new, it
Doesn't
says
create.
a proposal involving any of the following, C, division or allocation of land as a utility
We're not
or
proposing
drainage
anything.
easement.
We're not proposing any new easements.
It doesn't say new, I think is where,
That's where I'm getting at, yeah.
How could you propose
Doesn't say
something
new.
that wasn't new?
Just says division or allocation of land as utility or drainage easement. They're existing, but once this all gets said and done, you're going to have new requirements because the original contract, this is back on January 14th, 05, and it's a general warranty deed, and I'll read that. It says the conveyance also subject to an easement in perpetuity running with the land to discharge stormwater into a detention structure on the property and certain adjacent properties. Said structure currently existing on a 3.6 acre parcel. Deed reference number, blah, blah. Specifically, a stormwater detention pond with the capacity of 1.7 acre feet to be maintained by the grantor, his heirs, successors, or assigns for the benefit of the subject property and certain adjacent lands. Detention area is fully shown on the plat attached to this deed, Mark, which is Exhibit D that you have.
Could I respond to Andy had 2 questions. I responded to the second. I'd like to respond to the
Sure,
first.
go ahead.
There will be no new property owner that might be influenced or have to deal with the existing situation because Hood Incorporated is going to retain the area where the retention pond is at. The parcel that they intend to sell has public road frontage on Harold Avenue. It has access to public utilities at Harold Avenue too, because it does front over there a small portion onto Jefferson and onto Harold. So the necessity for any easement for that parcel on the corner, if it's created, is only a convenience. It's not really necessary for that new owner of that building to have to use any of those private easements for utilities or for access, for traffic. Hoon will retain that area in the middle. They'll still be responsible for the stormwater detention pond. They're willing to address the situation when they have more substance to their potential development plans. But for right now, we wouldn't know how to address any of that because we don't have an impact project to consider. So, Ms. Bowen's, aware that she'll still retain all the requirements for holding everyone in the area as stormwater, and that's not of a benefit to her either. That's a large portion of land that can't be developed at the moment. And as Andy said, you want to clean that up the best you can to get the highest use potential out of that area right there. So yeah, we understand that there will be some things in the future that will have to be dealt with. At this time, all we're looking to do is accommodate the subdivision of the land. And we understand that there are these other concerns too, but at the moment, there's no nexus, there's no connection that we believe exists in an amount to say that it creates a major subdivision as opposed to a minor subdivision.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak out of turn here. On this particular exhibit, which is the X-line survey for this proposed lot split, the 25-foot wide utility easement is shown. Who holds that easement? That's an easement for whom?
My understanding is that Larry Young uses that easement for water and sewer.
So is he the exclusive holder of that easement, or are there multiple owners that hold that? Because functionally, that easement would have to be jointly owned by the people that would use it to cross what functions as tract 3. You know, not only would Larry have to have access to that easement in a subdivision, but so would the across tract 3, but the owner of tract 1 would have to have ownership of it to cross tract 2 and tract 3, and the owner of tract 2 would have to have ownership of it to cross tract 3.
Yeah, my understanding would be that the lot retention by Ms. Bowen would just be the existing deed less the parcel that she's wanting to split off. In other words, that ability to use that easement is already in place, or the knowledge that that easement exists. She's not proposing to use that easement for anything right now. At
Could
the
Larry
time
Young
she would,
say-
then she would come back in, for example, to use it to tap a sewer line,
Could Larry
which
Young
I think
say,
would be a bad idea.
I'm sorry, could Larry Young say, that's my easement? Hey, owner of tract 1 or tract 2, you can't use my easement?
I'm not familiar enough with the language of the easement to be able to address that.
I think that's germane to the discussion about whether or not this is permitted. That's probably something we need to look at more closely. I think that the access easement against the 60-foot wide visiting nurses property is for the purposes of everybody. But that one in the back is something that I'm more concerned about for public utilities.
Just for my own clarification on this, when you referenced several times VFW, is that the Visiting Nurses Ohio Health's facility up there? You mentioned VFW as one of the parcels up here.
It is, sir. Yes, sir. That was the previous owner.
Okay, thank you.
So right now, nothing would be done with the pond until a new owner was established as far as purchasing that parcel?
Status quo would be
That's
the
what you're
case until there was some proposal for development. In other words, the existing easements would be in place, the existing requirement for the stormwater pond would be in place. You know, we're not saying that we won't have to come back for pretty extensive review at a point in time where some development is proposed.
Ms. Bain?
I know it's inconvenient, Steve, but why not do it now? Why not do it right, get it done, not create a problem down the road? We can't kick it down the road and have to hear it again for 2 hours.
Well, if the economic outlook for Hoon Incorporated was such that they actually had money in hand and knew for sure that they were going to actually do something there, that would be fine. But as a precedent to approval for the lot split, you know, it just seems an odd requirement to me.
But I've heard
It's not that it's not going to happen eventually, is this the appropriate time to do it?
define eventually. Is it going to be next month or the month after it? No, the thing is that it's kind of a pig in the poke. You say, well, they may not do it right away, but the economy's supposed to be good, and I guess I don't know why we would not do it right now. Define right, not in terms of economic need of the persons involved, but in terms of the land use. All right, so you've got 2 here that apparently aren't going to go along with you. I don't know who these guys are.
Well, first thing, Mr. Mayor, I just go ahead with I would prefer to get some legal clarification as far as, you know, going back to my original question about proceeding from a major
She might be able to-
subdivision to a minor
She might be able to.
and proceeding from there.
Yeah, my concern is not knowing what the language of the easement, how that reads. I'd like to see that, because that, for me, has raised a number of questions. How does it read? Does it belong to Larry? I don't know. Mr. Sorois, have you seen, by chance, the language of the easement?
I think I have. I haven't gone through this. This is quite the stack.
Mr. Pearson, do you
Mr.
have?
Pearson, I mean, he was dealing with this whole project at that time. So let me look through here real quick.
And I'd also like the legal department to clarify how many lots we're talking about then. If we're talking about,
Certainly an interpretation. realize the road as it stands now is not owned by Ms. Bowen. It's owned by Athens Visiting Nurses. It's on that parcel.
Right.
An option that I've looked at in my other hat here previously is that road becoming public back to Visiting Nurses building, which solves the problem of everybody being accessed off of a private easement. Everybody accessing off of a private easement, and so all of a sudden you have a public right-of-way that goes back there. Now, obviously, there's some of that is outside of Ms. Bowen's control, but that would solve the problem, certainly. I wonder if anyone has approached, or if she's approached, or you've approached Visiting Nurses to say whether or not they'd be willing to dedicate that as public right-of-way. And there is a corner of Ms. Bowen's property that then would probably need to be involved as well. But that would basically extend Harold Avenue, which functionally is what it's doing anyway, is going back there to be a public street all the way back to the beginning, or to Mr. Young's building. And then once it's a public street, this whole problem goes away of being accessed off of a private easement.
All right, if I could add a little bit of history to that too. At the time that Larry Young's lot was split off, the city actually had the same requirements or regulations as the county still has, and that's you can split up to 4 lots off of a private easement as long as there's a ingress-egress identified on a plat, and there's a maintenance agreement. At about the time, because I had to go back, I was the one that signed off on Larry's split, and I couldn't figure out how I did that without a variance from council for public road frontage. But at the time, the city regulations were the same as the county's. If you could illustrate that you had an ingress-egress easement and a maintenance agreement, you could split up to 4 lots off of a private road. And that's how that whole situation there got created. Mr. Hoon's lot that's clear in the back actually has a West State Street address. You access it off an alley, off West State. So that's how that one got split. Its public road frontage is the State Street. So these others occurred at a point in time where you could split lots off of a private road, and that's, I'll agree that has caused complications. As a matter of fact, at the time, the city council then rescinded that requirement and had to go back to public road frontage requirement. It was only in effect for about a year, and being a 22-year member of the Regional Planning Commission, I often contend at meetings that I think it's still a problem to have those, because all of a sudden somebody wants to know why the school bus won't come back, why the mailman won't come back, why the pothole's not fixed, why the snow's not plowed. It creates a problem. And that was kind of the start of the situation there, that access off that private road. So, but that's what exists right now. Cassie's not made any attempt to contact anybody that I know of about turning that into a public road.
Do you think she's willing to?
I have no idea. We've just been talking about a minor lot split with a variance for private easement in lieu of public road frontage.
And again, I believe that's Ohio Health that is the owner of that with Visiting Nurses.
Yeah, now, in the proposed deeds for the splits, if you looked at those, which is included in the meets and bounds description of the surveyor, it does for each of those parcels propose that there's access to a ingress-egress easement, and I'm really wanting to say access to that utility easement, but I'm not seeing that. But there's no reason why that couldn't also be added.
If they did not have access to that utility easement, where would they drain, or how?
Well, there's drainage, and then there's also water and I guess they'd have to change the ingress and egress easement to include not only ingress egress but also utilities.
So that would go back to that major subdivision definition of private easements. We'd be adding a private easement for utilities.
Well, I'm reading through the shared driveway agreement. Perhaps it talks about utilities in the shared driveway.
if I may submit this, there's some language here. It says, the deed for the commissioners visiting nurses contains a right to continue to dispose of storm drainage onto the adjacent property, stormwater detention structure. In effect, it is a stormwater easement. When Mr. Hoon started to modify the detention structure, it was his obligation, not that of the VFW or the successor, the Athens County Commissioners, to continue compliance with the land development permit. Subsequently, city staff worked with Mr. Hoon to develop a modified plan to accommodate the needs of the adjacent property owners and comply with the issued land development permit. In effect, a modified land development permit was issued. Andy has an extensive record pertaining to the redevelopment plan, but there does not exist a specific document signed by Mr. Hoon that says he's responsible for maintaining the pond. My belief is that the issue is a matter of record with the recording of the deeds in the revised plan. In addition, University Commons also has an approved land development permit issued by the City of Athens to discharge their stormwater into Athens Midtown Storage. And I believe by this issuance of the permit, they and their heirs, successors, and assignees are obligated to maintain the requirement of the permit. And it goes a little bit further, and this was from Mr. Pearson back in 2004.
It's a complicated.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated situation.
Well, since we're in the communication stage right now, is this something that we can have the legal department
Yeah, look at, yes.
take a look at that, get that first clarification, and I guess we can go from there. As I'm understanding maybe some of the points here, you believe that the lot split should happen regardless of what's happening with the pond right now, because in your mind, that's irrelevant to the split
At this,
itself.
yeah, at this time,
Yeah.
at this time.
He's not sitting up here.
But I guess we have some people on the commission who want to find out if the pond issue can be cleared up, I think, before or as the split is being taken.
Right. Well, I would ask too, if you are going, if you do that, I would also ask that clarification be made on other utilities such as water and sewer, because originally this easement just intended to convey stormwater. Is all it was intended to do. There was no proposal for any other use of the easement until Mr. Young's property was developed. And then he had to use that as his ability to access public utilities in Harold Avenue. So that was kind of the point in time where it morphed from just a stormwater easement to a all utility easement. I mean, if you just look at utilities, that might include buried electric, I mean, fiber, cable, I mean, there's all kinds of things that, you know, would they be allowed to be contained in that easement?
And to be clear, I mean, and I hate to get down into the weeds even more, but the 25 feet does not include the pipe that comes out of that Mr. Hoon installed, that comes out of the pond in this picture. It's further than 25 feet to the north of this fence line. So if you look at this easement that's on here, the pipe is actually running like this. You know, so it's the pipe that conveys the stormwater is not inside completely that 25-foot wide easement.
So would there have to be a right-of-way or an easement across those properties if we divide?
I mean, I think that there would. It should show that the true location of where the pipe is and identifies it as a perpetual stormwater easement. Because this 25-foot utility easement was established, as Mr. Pearson said, ultimately to get water and sewer, sanitary sewer and potable water from Harold Avenue over to Mr. Young's building, not for the purposes of the stormwater.
So it'd be your contention that the pond is somewhat germane to the split of the.
Well, I mean, I think that the split needs to include, if the split's to be allowed, it needs to include the actual location of where that pipe is, as opposed to, and I only know that because I watched it go in. I watched Jim put the pipe in. The city of Athens bought the pipe for him because attempting to solve the public health problem at the fairgrounds, and subsequently watched Mr. Hoon put it into the ground. And so when you look at this picture, you can see the corner of this pond right here. It goes from there and it runs down to the corner down here, and it's outside of that 25-foot easement. That 25-foot easement exists for the potable water and sanitary sewage for Mr. Young's building. So that would be something that I would want to see at a minimum if we were to allow this slot split to move forward, is the storm line being shown in its actual location on this X-line survey document.
Mr. Pearson, do you have a last comment?
Well, I'd just like to observe that, you know, that if that's been a problem, it's been a problem for over 10 years and could have been solved later or sooner. If it's something that needs to be done, that would need to be done irrelevant of this, you know, this request to split the lot. If it's something that needs to be cleaned up, we can have a surveyor draw a line, you know what I'm saying, and just clip off a corner to include that dog leg and the pipe in the easement. That's really not a problem, if that's all it amounts to.
Any other comment? Okay.
I'd like you to come back with a general statement about why the road will be made or not made, why that, I mean, because it's currently the law, way back in the past, not relevant. I think if it's the law today, they should be following the law. Because there's so many areas in the 3-mile limit where such a interpretation could also be used, or even this as perhaps a precedent.
Well, that interpretation has also recently been made by the Planning Commission in town and the City Council, granting some bloom variances for public road frontage to create a lot over off East State Street.
It was an existing in the...
And it was a creation of a new easement of access.
I think
and wasn't considered a major subdivision.
Steve, I do
So it would have
believe-
met the definition.
Okay, the loop was in all of the deeds according to what we heard. We were making a bad situation as good as we could make it, some of us think. But why should we divide lots here and make it worse in this area? I don't get it.
I mean, to be real honest, we're just looking for equal consideration given the historic way that these have been handled.
And historically, this particular situation has resulted in a significant amount of public expense to the city of Athens. My fear is that a further subdivision in this area is at some point in the future going to result in more public expense for the city of Athens. And if we were to grant this subdivision, I'd want some sort of protections that public expense threat or potential is not increased.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson. Appreciate
I
it.
appreciate the commission's attention. We were just looking for clarification on which direction we had to go. What did we have to do? You know, we turned the application in back in April, and we've just been awaiting what is it that we need to do to accommodate this split. So this helps the conversation quite a bit.
Terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Appreciate it. Report from the city planner, Mr. Loeb.
I have a few things this morning, or this afternoon. The first of which is that relating to the comprehensive plan update, we do have a series of neighborhood open houses scheduled for later this summer. We have 5 scheduled, with the first one being for the far east side neighborhood on Thursday, June 7th. And we're going to have 2 sessions or 2 opportunities. The first will be from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then we'll have one later in the evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Both of those will be at the community center. All of these workshops will be an open house, so somebody who's interested can stop in whenever they want within those time frames. I don't have a set presentation or speakers that they need to listen to, so you can come in for 10 minutes or you can come in for 2 hours. We'll have some mapping and interactive opportunities for people to participate. So again, the Far East Side will be on Thursday, June 7th at the community center. We have a meeting scheduled for the Near East Side neighborhood on Tuesday, June 12th at the Athens Public Library meeting room. And that'll be 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then from 5 to 7. We'll have a North Side meeting scheduled at the Highland Park Pavilion on June 14th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then from 5 to 7 that same evening. We're have West Side scheduled for Tuesday, June 26th from 11 to 1, and then from 5 to 7 also at Arts West. And lastly, we have a South Side meeting scheduled for Thursday, June 28th from 11 to 1, and then from 5 to 7, and that'll be at the OUN. Like I said, those will be open house formats. People can come and go as they choose, hopefully trying to catch people on their lunch breaks or after work. They can stop in on their way home or once they get settled in for the night. Once we've done those, we will then have opportunities for people to participate through online and through other forms for those who could not attend those workshops. The only other two things I wanted to report is that tomorrow is National Bike to Work Day, and Athens is participating for the first time ever that we're aware of. So if you are inclined and interested and have a bike and ideally a helmet, feel free to take your bike to work or ride your bike to work. And there are 4 different stations around town where somebody can stop and get a cup of coffee or a snack or something from 7:30 to 10. There will be an uptown location at the county courthouse. And my final report, final update is this Saturday. We are celebrating Athens Armory Day. A historic marker from Ohio History Connection will be installed at the Athens Armory in a dedication ceremony on Saturday at 11 a.m. in front of the building. We've got a few activities for that, and we'll have the doors to the building open, so if people want to check it out, they can come in. That'll be starting at 11 a.m. And as part of that, through a sponsorship, the Southeast Ohio History Center will be open all day Saturday for free to anybody who is interested in stopping in as part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments for Mr. Lowe? Mr. Surratt? Oh, I'm sorry.
I do have one comment. I really appreciate the parking study that was done for the uptown area. It's a good read. There's a lot of real valuable information inside there in terms of how we move forward with parking in the uptown area. So thank you to you and to your interns who are helping with that.
Along those lines, Mayor Patterson, the active transportation study that we received an ODOT grant for consulting work earlier this year, we expect to have a draft product on that at the end of this month.
And active transportation being?
Looking at how people walk and bike uptown, what kind of amenities are needed for that, how does the traffic circulate. We're also getting some information on basically a market report on uptown demand for housing and for office space. So this will be a really great report. All of this will be incorporated into our comprehensive plan.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Surratt?
Just a reminder to Athens citizens, grass is growing and continues to grow, and if you can pay attention to your front and backyards, I should mention side yards also. And also, are we falling apart here?
Maybe.
If citizens coming to the code office, our staff is currently inundated with contractor registration, and a little patience on response time would be greatly appreciated. That's all I have.
Okay.
Mr. Surratt, I'm glad you brought up the grass as well as any vegetation that might be growing in somebody's gutters. Yes, because if there's vegetation growing out of your gutters, that means there's mosquito larvae up there, and mosquitoes in the future. It's retaining water. So it doesn't qualify as a green roof. So clean your gutters.
Great. That's all I have.
Great. Mr. Jones, did you have a question?
Well, on the grass thing, it's an interesting thing came across my desk this morning in doing our environmental clearance for the Northwest Bike Path Spur that we're finalizing the design at this moment. We got word from the ODOT District 10 that it's quite possible that by June of 2019, the monarch butterfly is going to be listed on the endangered species list, which has significant impact on what you're allowed to mow. And what habitat that you would destroy by mowing. So as we look at our laws related to grass and weeds and things going forward, butterfly habitat may all of a sudden become more sacrosanct. So I do have an item for, in response to the planner's statements as well. He and I are working together with the consultant that we selected for the Stimson Avenue corridor project. And part of the preliminary engineering of that project is going to be looking at land use along Stimson Avenue. And there may be some recommendations on zoning changes or perhaps a zoning overlay that will be that will come out of the preliminary engineering and the work with the stakeholders on there, and then those will be brought to this body in advance of seeking change by the city council, sometime probably in the next 9 months.
Anything else? Okay. There is no one in our live audience to speak to the commission. Announcements and other business?
I have something that I received recently from Judge Goldsberry, and I think everyone sitting here has a copy of this, and if not, that's all right. We'll make sure you would get this to you. And it's interesting. It was an article that came out of Tempe, Arizona. Actually, it was in USA Today on Tempe, Arizona. And it has to do with something that's being referenced as micro estates or humble homes. I think people are familiar with tiny houses, 300 square foot of space, give or take. These are slightly larger, 600 square foot of space, give or take. And it is interesting as we look at city parcels. We have several parcels in the city, city-owned parcels, to explore ways in which maybe we could have some level of public-private partnership to create something like this. I'm not saying we are going to, but it's certainly worth exploring. But I wanted to acknowledge that I did receive this, and it's worth pondering over.
It is, sir, and I think beyond city-owned parcels, I think that looking at our subdivision regulations and how this would relate to existing subdivision regulations according to lot size, pushing towards conservation design with updating our subdivision regulations so that conservation design is a consideration in our subdivision regulations. I think that this would inform that effort, and then ultimately this committee would, or this planning commission would forward those recommendations to council for information as well.
Within this article, it is interesting that these are, the market value of these is somewhere around $120,000, $130,000, and could be even less. These are basically starter homes or potentially retire in place type homes.
How would that fit into current zoning?
I would think R1 would support it.
As long as they're detached or as a planned unit development, but.
We have to look at lot size and what
Right.
the minimum lot
Right.
size are, and if they make sense given, because you'd probably want more density associated with these.
Right.
Yes.
And so your lot size would need to maybe shrink.
And we have to be careful that we differentiate these homes versus tiny homes.
Yes.
Tiny homes usually come on trailers, and then they're still classified as trailers, even though they look like a tiny home. Sure. So we have to make sure we have that delineation in our requirements.
Okay. Anything else? Our next meeting will be on June 7th, 2018, with the business completed by the Athens City Planning Commission. This meeting is adjourned.